The rancher took one look at her limp and said no. The preacher said she would do just fine. Clara Winslow stepped off the train in Buckhorn, Kansas, on a Wednesday afternoon in May, with one trunk, one letter of introduction, and a limp that she had carried since she was 9 years old, when a wagon wheel rolled over her left foot, and the bones healed in a way that the bones had not intended. The limp was not dramatic. It was a slight favoring of the right side, a rhythm in her walk that was different from other people's rhythm, but no less steady. She had lived with it for 17 years, and had long since stopped thinking of it as a limitation. It was simply the way she moved, the way some people are left-handed, or some people squint in bright light, a fact of her body that affected nothing except the assumptions of people who noticed it, which most people did not. But Virgil Dunn was looking for it. Virgil Dunn had been looking at her since the moment she appeared on the platform, and what he was looking for was a reason to say no, and the limp gave him one. He was standing at the end of the platform with his hat in his hands, and his jaw set in the particular way that a man's jaw sets when he has already made a decision and is waiting for the moment to announce it. He was 42, thick-necked and prosperous, a cattle rancher with 800 acres and a 2-story house that needed a woman in it, and an advertisement in the Kansas City paper that had described the qualities he required in a wife: strong, capable, willing to work, no physical infirmities. Clara had answered the advertisement from a boarding house in St. Louis, where she had been living since her mother died, working as a seamstress in a garment factory that paid enough to survive, but not enough to build anything worth surviving for. She had described herself accurately in every respect except one. She had not mentioned the limp, because the limp did not make her weak or incapable or unwilling to work, and she had hoped, with the particular optimism of a woman who has been underestimated her entire life, that the man at the other end of the letters would see her before he saw the limp. He did not. He saw the limp first, and the limp was all he needed. The woman attached to it, her face, her bearing, her clear dark eyes, the way she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a person who has walked through the world at a different rhythm and has never let the rhythm slow her down. None of that registered. The limp registered. The limp was sufficient. Miss Winslow. He did not extend his hand. I specified no physical infirmities. I have a slight limp. It does not affect my ability to work. It affects my ability to accept you. The work on a ranch requires a woman who can walk without hindrance. I am sorry you came all this way. I will pay for your return ticket. Clara stood on the platform of the Buckhorn station with the May sun on her face and the May wind in her hair, and the particular stillness of a person who has been rejected for something they cannot change, and who is deciding, in the space between one breath and the next, whether to collapse or stand straighter. She stood straighter. I do not want your return ticket, she said. I want the opportunity I was promised. The opportunity was promised to a woman without infirmity. You are not that woman. I am sorry. He was not sorry. He was relieved. Clara could see the relief the way you see weather coming across flat country, visible from a distance, unmistakable in its approach. He had found his reason, and the reason absolved him of the obligation, and the absolution was what he had been looking for since she stepped off the train. He touched his hat, a gesture that mimicked courtesy without containing any, and turned. He walked to his wagon and climbed onto the seat, and drove away without looking back, the wagon wheels kicking up dust that hung in the May air like a commentary on his departure, and Clara Winslow stood on the platform of the Buckhorn station with her trunk beside her and her letter of introduction in her hand, and nowhere to go. Reverend Josiah Hale had been watching from the bench outside the station. He had come to collect a package, a set of hymnals ordered from a publisher in Philadelphia, and he had been sitting on the bench reading the newspaper when the train arrived and the scene unfolded in front of him like a sermon he had not planned to preach, but that preached itself. He was 36, lean, with a scholar's hands and a farmer's tan, and the particular expression of a man who believes in the fundamental goodness of people and is regularly disappointed by the evidence. He had been the minister in Buckhorn for 4 years, serving a congregation that was small and devout, and, like most frontier congregations, more interested in practical faith than theological debate. He preached on Sundays with a sincerity that compensated for a delivery that was, by his own admission, more earnest than eloquent. He visited the sick on weekdays, bringing soup and scripture in proportions that varied according to the patient's preference. He performed weddings and funerals as the calendar required, and he lived in the parsonage behind the church on a salary that was just sufficient for a man who did not require much. He watched Virgil Dunn drive away. He watched Clara standing on the platform. He watched the particular composition of her posture, the straight spine, the lifted chin, the hands that were not trembling because she would not allow them to tremble. And he understood that the woman on the platform was not a woman who needed rescuing. She was a woman who needed an option, and providing options to people who had run out of them was, in Josiah's experience, the most useful thing a minister could do. He stood up from the bench. He folded his newspaper and tucked it under his arm. He walked to the platform with the unhurried gait of a man who does not rush, because rushing implies panic, and panic is not useful. "Ma'am, I am Josiah Hale. I am the minister here. I could not help but notice your situation." Clara looked at him. She looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze of a woman who has been assessed unfavorably for the last 5 minutes and is now applying the same standard to someone else. "My situation is that I have traveled 400 miles on a train I spent my last savings on to marry a man who does not want me because I walk with a limp. I have no money for a return ticket, no family to wire, and no plan beyond the one that just fell apart on this platform. I also noticed that you walked down those train steps without difficulty, carried your own bag, and stood your ground against a man twice your size. The limp does not appear to be the limitation Mr. Dunn believes it is. It is not a limitation at all. Then Mr. Dunn is a fool, which I have suspected for some time, but have not previously had evidence to confirm." Clara's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. The circumstances did not warrant a smile, but it was the precursor to one, the way a crack in ice is the precursor to thaw. "I have no money for lodging," she said, "and no one to stay with, and a return ticket that I do not want. The parsonage has a spare room. It is small, and the roof leaks in one corner, but it is dry in the other 3 corners, and you are welcome to it for as long as you need. You are offering a room to a woman you met 30 seconds ago. I am offering a room to a person who needs one. The duration of our acquaintance does not change the need." Clara moved into the parsonage that afternoon. The spare room was exactly as described, barely 8 feet by 10, with a narrow bed and a washstand, and a window that looked out on the church cemetery, which was not cheerful, but was quiet, and a leak in the northeast corner that Josiah had been meaning to fix for 2 years, and that Clara fixed herself on the second day, with tar paper and nails she found in the church shed, a repair that Josiah discovered the following morning when he went to apologize for the leak. He stood in the doorway of the spare room and looked at the ceiling, and then at Clara, who was sitting on the bed mending a stocking, and felt something rearrange itself inside his understanding of the world. "You fixed the roof," he said. "The leak was in the corner. The fix was straightforward. I have been meaning to fix that for 2 years. Meaning and doing are separated by a ladder and 20 minutes. I had both." Josiah Hale looked at Clara Winslow and felt something he had not expected to feel, and was not entirely sure he was equipped to manage. The particular admiration that arises when you encounter competence in a person the world has undervalued, and the admiration is sharpened by the injustice of the undervaluation. She had a limp. She also had strong, capable hands that could fix a roof, and a spine that could withstand rejection, and a mind that was quicker than his, which was not a low bar, because Josiah's mind was reasonably quick for a man who read Greek and Hebrew and preached in English. Clara found work. She found it the way competent people find work in small towns, by doing things that needed doing and being noticed by the people who needed them done. She mended clothes for the doctor's wife, who had 3 children, and a talent for producing torn garments that bordered on the industrial. She repaired a broken chair for the general store owner, and then a broken shelf, and then a display case whose glass she reset with a precision that the store owner said was better than the carpenter who had built it in the first place. She baked bread, thick golden loaves with a crust that crackled when you broke it. and an interior that was soft and warm, that the storekeeper's wife declared was the best bread in Buckhorn, which was an opinion that traveled the town with the speed of all opinions about bread, which is to say, very fast. Within 2 weeks, she had a small but steady income, enough for her room and board and a little set aside, a reputation for reliability that spread through the town like a good rumor, and a place in Buckhorn that had nothing to do with Virgil Dunn and everything to do with her own capabilities. Josiah watched. He watched the way a minister watches his congregation, with attention and care, and the awareness that every person is a story being written in real time. He watched Clara fix things. He watched her bake bread. He watched her walk through town with the steady, slightly asymmetric gait that Virgil Dunn had declared a disqualification, and that the town had decided to ignore because the woman attached to the Limp was too useful and too likable to dismiss. He fell in love with her gradually, which is the way ministers fall in love, not in a flash of revelation, but in the slow accumulation of evidence, sermon by sermon, conversation by conversation, meal by meal. She cooked supper for them both, and the cooking was good, and the eating together was better, and the talking afterward was better still, evening by evening on the parsonage porch where they sat and talked while the Kansas dusk turned the sky colors that neither of them could name. They talked about the town and the congregation and the weather and the books they had read. Josiah lent her volumes from his shelf and was delighted to discover that she read them faster than he did and understood them at least as well. They talked about the lives they had lived before Buckhorn brought them together, his years at seminary in Ohio, her years at the garment factory in St. Louis, and the talking was the scaffolding on which something larger was being built, one conversation at a time. Clara fell in love with him at the same pace, for the same reasons. His honesty, his gentleness, the way he listened to her as though what she said mattered not because she was a woman in his house, but because she was a person with a mind worth listening to, with the same gradual certainty that characterizes people who have been disappointed enough to be cautious, and who are cautious enough to recognize when caution is no longer necessary. He proposed on a Sunday evening in August, on the parsonage porch, with the Kansas sunset performing its nightly extravagance of color behind the church steeple, and the crickets starting their evening argument in the grass. "I am a minister," he said. "I do not have 800 acres or a cattle ranch. I have a parsonage with a spare room that you fix the roof on, and a salary that covers necessities but not luxuries, and a congregation that would be fortunate to have you. You are proposing. I am. Badly, probably, because I have performed many weddings but have never been on this side of one, and it turns out the performing is considerably easier than the proposing. My hands are shaking, which I hope you will attribute to the importance of the question, rather than to any deficiency in my character. You are not doing badly. You are doing honestly, which is the same thing you have done since the day you offered me a room. Yes." They married in September, on a clear Saturday morning, when the prairie grass was golden and the sky was the deep, impossible blue that Kansas produces in early fall, in the church, with the full congregation in attendance, and the new hymnals from Philadelphia open to hymn number 47, which Josiah had chosen because it was about grace, and Virgil Dunn notably absent, though whether his absence was from embarrassment or indifference, no one bothered to determine, because no one particularly cared. Clara Winslow became Clara Hale, and the parsonage that had been a bachelor's quarters with dusty shelves and mismatched plates became a home with curtains in the windows and flowers on the table, and the smell of bread baking every Thursday, and the spare room with the repaired roof, the tar paper still holding, as Clara pointed out with justifiable pride, became a sewing room where Clara mended and sewed and contributed to the household with the quiet industry that had defined her since childhood. The Limp remained. It remained because it had always been there and would always be there, a part of her body, the way her hands were a part, and her spine was a part, and her sharp, quick mind was a part. It was the least interesting thing about her, and Josiah told her so regularly, and she believed him because he was a minister and believed in telling the truth, and because she had spent enough of her life being defined by the Limp to know when someone saw past it, and Josiah saw past it every single day, and because the truth, in this case, was obvious to everyone in Buckhorn, except the man who had driven away from the station without looking back.